The wall did not rise to protect a city. It rose to save an idea that was already failing. In the early hours of August 13, 1961, Berlin woke to a sound that did not belong to peace. Metal struck stone. Boots scraped pavement. Trucks idled in streets that had gone to sleep as ordinary avenues and awakened as borders. Barbed wire was pulled tight across intersections that had carried commuters only hours before. Concrete posts were driven into sidewalks where children had played. By dawn, a city had been cut open with surgical precision. The Berlin Wall was not built to keep enemies out. It was built to keep people in. For years, the German Democratic Republic had been bleeding quietly, not through rebellion or invasion, but through departure. Doctors left, engineers left, students left. Entire families slipped through Berlin, exploiting a fragile gap in the Iron Curtain where ideology could not yet harden into stone. Each person who crossed was a verdict rendered without words. A system that claimed historical inevitability was being rejected step by step. The state watched the numbers climb and understood the danger. This was not just migration. It was humiliation, a socialist republic hemorrhaging its most capable citizens to a rival system across an invisible line. Reform was too slow. Persuasion had failed, so the regime chose certainty over legitimacy. It chose a wall. What began as temporary wire became concrete. What was described as a defensive measure became permanent architecture. Watchtowers rose at calculated intervals. Floodlights turned a night into exposure. Orders were rewritten until they were unmistakable. Escape would now be met with force.
Some walls are built to keep enemies out. Others are built to keep a population in. The Berlin Wall was not just concrete and wire. It was fear poured into stone. A line that turned neighbors into strangers and freedom into a crime. This channel does not treat division as policy alone. We examine the human cost, the escapes, the gunshots, and the lives halted by a border that ran through living rooms. I'm Rayo, and here, we don't just study borders. We expose the moment they become prisons.
Ideologically, the wall was dressed in language of protection, an anti-fascist barrier. The regime called it a shield against Western corruption and subversion, but no propaganda could conceal the truth. Governments confident in their future do not imprison their population to preserve it. And yet, something larger happened. A local solution to a political crisis became a global symbol. In a single line of concrete, the Cold War revealed its true nature. Two systems faced each other, not across oceans or proxy wars, but across a street. Capitalism and communism stood eye to eye, separated by meters of reinforced fear. The wall turned ideology into geography. Every slab of concrete declared division permanent. Every guard tower announced mistrust as policy. Every sealed street reminded the world that this conflict was not abstract. It was intimate. It cut through kitchens, cemeteries, churches, and memories. Berlin ceased to be merely a city. It became the front line of a divided planet. The wall did not need to move to control people. It only needed to exist. Once the concrete settled into place, East Berlin did not erupt in chaos. There were no massed riots, no immediate collapse. Instead, life-adjusted streets ended abruptly. Train lines stopped mid. Windows that had once looked onto another neighborhood now faced watchtowers and floodlights. The state called it normalization. The people felt something else. Surveillance became the air they breathed. Life in the German Democratic Republic was not defined by constant brutality, but by constant awareness. Awareness that someone might be listening, that a casual remark could outlive its speaker. That silence was often safer than truth. Fear was not episodic. It was ambient. The Stasi perfected this atmosphere. They did not need to be everywhere. They only needed people to believe they could be anywhere. Files multiplied quietly. Conversations were archived more faithfully than memories. Trust eroded, not because betrayal was constant, but because it was possible. Neighbors hesitated before confiding. Friends measured their words. Even families learned restraint. Children absorbed the rules early. In classrooms, the state was portrayed as inevitable and just. Maps showed a divided world arranged correctly and incorrectly. The West was painted as decadent, morally hollow, dangerous to the soul. The wall was explained as protection, not imprisonment. At home, parents lowered their voices, not because they disagreed, but because disagreement was unsafe. A child repeating the wrong sentence at school could trigger consequences no one could reverse. Teachers listened. Co-workers reported. The Stasi relied not only on officers, but on participation. Everyday life continued under this pressure. People worked, queued, married, celebrated birthdays. The system offered stability in exchange for obedience. For some, this trade felt acceptable. For others, unbearable. For all, it was unavoidable. The wall was always present. Even for those who never saw it directly, it shaped ambition. Travel became a privilege rarely granted. The outside world existed as rumor and static, glimpsed illegally through Western television watched late at night. Volume low, curtains closed. The contrast was unbearable. Bright music without permission. Choice without justification. The state insisted it was illusion, but illusion did not explain why people kept risking their lives to escape it. Escape became obsession. Some dug tunnels beneath streets by candlelight, counting meters like heartbeats. Others hid inside modified cars, trusting engineering more than mercy. Families planned separations, knowing reunions might never come. Every attempt was a calculation against dogs, alarms, towers, and bullets. The border was designed to kill. Sand was raked to preserve footprints. Fences triggered sirens. Guards were trained not to hesitate. Those who died were erased from public memory. Martyrs were dangerous. Still, people ran because life without choice felt slower than death. Because hope survives even under concrete. Because the wall made undeniable what the regime refused to admit. People were not being protected. They were being contained. On the night the wall fell, no one gave the order. There was no declaration of surrender, no carefully planned transition, no moment in which power was formally handed over. What ended one of the most feared symbols of the 20th century began with hesitation, confusion, and a sentence spoken sem compreensão total do que significava. By late 1989, the German Democratic Republic was exhausted. The fear that had once disciplined the population no longer worked as it had. Protests filled streets, not with rage, but with persistence. Week after week, people gathered holding candles, not weapons. They did not chant revolution. They asked for permission to travel, to speak, to choose. The state, trained only in control, did not know how to answer restraint. Inside the regime, certainty collapsed first. Meetings multiplied. Reforms were discussed in closed rooms where no one fully trusted the outcome. Travel restrictions were reconsidered, softened on paper, diluted into language meant to relieve pressure without surrendering authority. The intention was simple: calm the streets, preserve control. By time was already gone. At a routine press conference, an official stood before microphones and cameras and read from a document he barely understood. New regulations on travel, he announced. Citizens would be allowed to cross borders under certain conditions. Journalists pressed for clarity. When would the changes take effect? Hesitated. He looked down at the page again. Then he answered with a word that history would not forgive. Immediately. The sentence escaped the room and began to move. Radios carried it first, then televisions, then whispers that multiplied faster than the state could correct them. Immediately. No forms, no delays, no conditions. People stepped into the streets without knowing exactly where they were going, only that something impossible had been said out loud. Crowds gathered at checkpoints that had once defined the limits of their lives. The guards were unprepared. Phones rang unanswered. Command chains dissolved into silence. Manuals written for absolute obedience offered no guidance for uncertainty. The orders to fire had always depended on authority that now refused to speak. The crowd pressed closer. Faces marked by decades of surveillance stood inches from concrete that had ruled them. Some cried, some laughed, some waited in disbelief, convinced that hope itself might still be illegal. Guards, young men trained to enforce division, found themselves forced to decide history without permission. Minutes stretched, then hours, and finally, Someone moved. A gate lifted. A barrier opened, not ceremonially, hesitantly, cautiously. People crossed as if stepping onto unstable ground. Then faster, then running. Families reunited in streets once forbidden. Strangers embraced beneath floodlights that no longer felt threatening. The wall that had destroyed lives surrendered without a single shot. By morning, the division was over. People climbed onto the wall. They chipped at it with hammers and bare hands. Concrete fell in fragments that were carried away like relics. The border that had killed now collapsed under celebration. The most rigid line of the Cold War cracked open beneath human insistence. The guards did not fire. They stepped aside. The world watched in disbelief as the symbol of an era dissolved live on television. No tanks rolled. No missiles launched. The Cold War's most visible scar fell not to force, but to irrelevance. The wall did not fall because it was attacked. It fell because it was no longer believed in. In the months that followed, Germany, Eastern Europe, unraveled. Regimes that had seemed permanent collapsed with startling speed. The Cold War did not end with a treaty or a final battle, but with a crowd that refused to go home. The irony was complete. A wall built to preserve a regime destroyed it instead. In trying to stop history, it exposed its own fear. In trying to contain people, it revealed how little consent it possessed. Berlin healed quickly on the surface. Streets reconnected. Buildings were restored. The city became whole again in ways that could be photographed and mapped. But memory remained. Those who had lived under the wall carried habits that did not vanish with concrete. The instinct to whisper. The reflex to watch. The weight of mistrust. The wall had not only divided a city, it had divided lives into before and after. Today, fragments of it stand behind glass in museums. Tourists touch the concrete, now harmless. History has made it safe. But for those who lived beneath it, the meaning is heavier. A regime believed concrete could replace legitimacy. It was wrong. The night the wall fell, a people were not just they were released.